Has anyone, by a show of hands, seen me before at a Widener Day or somewhere across campus, even if you possibly know who I am? Okay, for those of you that don't, my name is Zach Young. I'm a sophomore nursing major. I am president of the Nursing Ambassadors Committee for the nursing school. I am a member of WSNA, and I'm also a member of the Student Philanthropy Council, and most likely going to be a tutor for anatomy too. I'm currently in the process of finalizing that, so hopefully if you guys ever need some help, you'll hopefully see me or one of my other student peers at some point. So we are here today to talk about anatomy and physiology and the test taking, the study habits, and the things that you guys need to know going into this course. Obviously you guys have gone through Anatomy 1 already, so you have some type of, experience with it, but Anatomy 2 does move at a different pace than Anatomy 1. I don't know if you guys have noticed that yet. So by a show of hands, who has Professor Boyer? Okay, so for those of you that don't have Professor Boyer, you might be a little more lucky, maybe a little not lucky. That's all up to perspective. But as we know for Professor Boyer, one of the things that he does in his lecture is he talks very fast. There's information coming at you 100% of the time, and a lot of the time that information that he's speaking is also not going to be on the board. So we're just going to talk about some study habits, different things that I've noticed as a student, and also from being a friend to my other friends that are going through the class at the time. And I hope that you guys are able to take something away from that in the meantime. Alright, so why is it difficult? One of the things that I was talking about was understanding lecture. So when the professors are talking to you in your lecture, a lot of the times you'll see some students, they like to record the lecture because they like to go back and listen to things. That is one of the things that I recommend doing. If you don't take in information as quick as some other students can, when specifically taking notes, recording the lecture and going back and picking up on things you might not have been strictly paying attention to at the time is extremely helpful. And when I say understanding lecture, I don't want you to assume that you need to understand it the day of that class. A lot of the times you are taking in so much information as a nursing student from so many different sides and so many different classes that you need time to be able to reflect and to absorb that information. And that comes in with the studying and practice that you have to do in your classes and outside of your classes as well. Now, I don't know, does anyone know the rule for study habits for the hours studied to the credits? I show of hands. Yes?
2 times that.
Yes. So usually, a minimum, you at least want to be doing 3 hours a week for a 3-credit course. Most of the time, it's recommended to you that you're going to at least want to do 6 hours. And when students hear that, they think, oh my God, 6 hours, like what am I going to do with my week? That's like, half of a quarter of my day and everything. Well, 6 hours is meant to be spread out over an entire week period. That's why we recommend it the way we do. And when we say 6 hours, we don't mean like, oh, let me pick 4 hours of this one day or 5 or 6 hours of this one day, and I'm just going to cram everything into one place, because that's not going to be efficient for you. And that's why when we have that recommendation, we want you to spread it out. That time to reflect and to practice what you're doing in your classes is so important because you can't overwhelm yourself. There's another thing that's called teaching to test. You might have heard this concept from your teachers in elementary school or high school. In college it's a little more flexible, but a lot of times the students feel that they are being taught strictly to a test as opposed to knowledge that they are going to need in the future. So one of the things that I recommend to you is understanding that the things that you are now learning in your classes, such as anatomy and physiology and your other nursing practice classes, are going to be used for the rest of your career. That having that idea and knowledge of knowing that this is something that I'm going to need to apply down the road, and this isn't just a humanities class that I need to take out of the way. You aren't learning your material just to test. You are learning the material to test, to get that knowledge and experience, and to practice someday. And that is a perspective that I almost didn't get until my second year here. So that's something I hope that you guys can learn as quick as I did. Study habits. So by show of hands, who likes studying all at once? And does anyone like going to the library? Where are my library people? Because I know they're somewhere. Yep, there we go. Okay. So when you guys sit down, are you often studying with a lot of breaks in betweens, or are we studying all at once? By show of hand, who usually takes breaks? Okay, and how about the people that usually just read the text straight through and just crams? You can be honest, it's not a bad thing. Okay, so one of the things about study habits is there's so many different types of study habits, and we are a variety of different types of people. And one of the things with that means that not every person is going to study the same way, learn information the same way, and test the same way. So when it comes to things like study habits, knowing what is best for you and knowing how you learn, how you study, and how you test is something that is very important. One of the things that I learned is that I am very much a visual learner. So for me, sitting down and looking at a textbook can be very overwhelming because you sit there and you notice all this information in front of you and you say, what am I supposed to do with this? And then you go to your lecture and he's saying all this information to you and you're just sitting there like, oh gosh, like I have an exam next week or I have a practicum in lab and I have no idea what's going on and I can't even identify a bone that is left to the other bone. And that can be overwhelming, but you need to take time to relax. You need to take time to reflect on what you need to do as a student to be most successful. That means trying different things. You might have done a lot of different things throughout elementary school and high school. Some of us sat around and just passed time in high school. It was easy to get good grades just because we were smart then, but this is college and you'll learn that this material is not something you can just sort of sit around and be like, oh, like, I'll, look over it a day or two before and I'll be fine. So what I call the next thing is burnout. And what I mean by burnout is strictly burnout of the head, when you're sitting there and you've been studying for 6 to 8 hours before an exam and you are just tapped out. Like you're looking at the wall's like blurry, like you're looking at your textbook, you almost just want to throw it in the fire, things like that. And we've all gotten to that point of frustration, whether it be another course or in Anatomy 1. And that burnout is important to understand because you need to give yourself a break as a student. And those breaks allow you to, revitalize yourself, go get something to eat, go take a drink, listen to some music, or even talk with friends. And when I say talk with friends, it doesn't have to be just about anything either. You could even be reflecting on what you are studying, find out what the other person is worried about for that upcoming exam, and maybe you can even help each other. So why is it important? As I said before, the whole new perspective of being able to understand why this class is important as compared to other classes is something that I really want to try to emphasize throughout this. Anatomy and physiology is going to be used throughout the rest of your nursing practice. It's going to be used specifically in your clinical practice and your application with assessing the human body. You'll learn a lot more about that next semester in classes like health assessment and pharm. And you obviously want to know what you're doing when you're with a patient. That is the optimal goal, and that's why you're here in nursing, because you're going to be working with patients for every day of your life from here on out. And you want to understand what is going on with them. You want to be able to do the job that you need to do. And you can't do that without the set stone, the first brick on top of everything else. That is anatomy and physiology. Having that first understanding of the human body in which everything else that's going to come the next semester and your junior and senior year on top of that. Testing is also another important thing. Being able to understand the material that you are being tested for. You are not just taking exams in this class, you do have a lab component, and that lab component not only has its own testing, but it's practicum and quizzes. You guys know all about that. But all of that is so important, and it's all put into this one course view, and it can seem overwhelming. But being able to separate those exams, those quizzes, and those practicums, and understanding each important part of why you're doing that and what the material is that you're learning for that is something that needs to be focused on. Obviously, another reason why it's important is your GPA. We all know in nursing we have to have that 3.0 by the time we get to our junior year. Now, it's not as hard as it seems. You do good in your classes, we already have to have at least a C average in our classes. So being able to just have that goal in mind of, I want to do as best as I can in this class now, because as things get harder along in junior and senior year, you want to be able to have that flexibility of, maybe I'm not doing so well in this class that I like, but I have a good GPA comfort to know that I'll be okay. And of course, overall success. As I said, with everything, you're going to be clinically practicing one day, and you want to be able to have that success, that confidence on the floor, and that confidence of assessing your first patient, or maybe your thousandth patient down the road. And how? So one of the things that I stressed before was application. One of the things that I noticed as a student when I was taught by my teacher, and one of the things that I noticed that my friends strictly struggled with was what I call application. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. Making connections, being able to say, you know, this is important because of this, or I need to know this information because of this. Making those connections of, you know, even from lecture to lab, because a lot of times in lecture and lab people think it's two separate different classes, but a lot of the times those classes meet up in very specific ways that you can learn something in lecture that is going to help you in lab. You just have to be able to pay attention for that. Being able to planning your studying habits is actually a good thing. A lot of students say they have success from that. Being able to say to myself, okay, if I schedule in at least 2 hours tonight after dinner, I know that I am going to be good. And a lot of times having that confirmation of knowing we did something makes the student more confident and even test better. And just studying in general, even if you think that it's, you know, something that's nice and easy, just look over it. Just make sure that you know exactly what you are getting yourself into. You know, test yourself, close the book at the end of studying a chapter and be able to reflect on that. At the end of a chapter, you should be able to close the book and at least name 5 major points from that. And practicing as well. One of the things with anatomy and physiology is the practical part of this component for this course, is the fact that you should be able to identify things. And when I say practice, I mean practice identifying specific parts of the body. You are going to learn a lot more about that in health assessment and so on in the rest of your practice, your junior and senior year. But being able to start identifying things with the human body, even with your friends or yourself, or even using online tools and visual aids or games that are all out there for you, being able to practice is going to make you a lot more confident with knowing what you are looking at. So as I said before, I was talking about application, and I said I would talk about it now. So the actual definition for application is putting something into operation. And what I mean by that, we're going to take the operation part out of that because I don't really like the word operation strictly for nursing. But putting something into perspective, putting something into a connection. When I say application, the example that I have here is renal failure. Does anyone know what renal failure is? Yes?
Kidney failure.
Okay, so renal failure is kidney failure. So if I was going to apply my knowledge of kidney failure with a patient, so let's say a patient has renal failure. It's okay if you don't know it, but if anyone else knows it as well, what could you possibly be looking out for a patient that has renal failure? If I've learned anything about the kidneys in my anatomy and physiology class, what is something that I could be looking for? Yes?
Like unusual urine?
Unusual urine, yes, because urine is processed through the kidneys. And another major thing to notice is water, urine, everything that is processed, liquid, edema, everything through that is through the kidneys. And that is a part of application, because a lot of times you're going to sit in your anatomy and physiology class, and Boyer is going to be lecturing at you talking about the kidneys, and you're going to say, ugh, this is dragging on, or why is this so important of knowing all these specific parts of the body? And you're sitting there watching the third slide on nephrons, and you're thinking to yourself, well, you know, why is this important? But nephrons are, you know, the complete component that has to deal with filtration in the kidneys. And if the nephrons are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, then that is going to have the filtration system down, which is going to lead to problems with urine, problems with edema and the fluid throughout the body. And that is what you will be looking for as a nurse on the floor with a patient with renal failure. And that is making that application, that's making those connections of, you know, yes, I learned about nephrons in class, but instead of this just being something that I need to memorize, why is it important? How can I apply it someday? Taking things from real life and bringing it into the classroom or into your own ideas to be able to relate it and understand why I need to know this. One of the things that I did when I was in high school and in college so far is making those connections, being able to make those real life applications and saying to myself, okay, well, yes, all of this information is in front of me, but I need to know how one body system correlates to another. I need to know why that skin layer is so important, or why, you know, this part of the lung is important because it strictly has to deal with, you know, lung cancer and things like that. Being able to take those ideas out of thin air and plant them to something. A lot of times you'll be sitting at a test and you'll see 4 different versions of skin tissue, and you're going to say, you know, first of all, these are 4 different things that I've seen in class, and they all seem pretty important and pretty relevant to what that question is. How am I going to know what the difference is? And in the back of your mind, you can say, oh, I remember him talking about you know, why this one skin layer was important because of the disease that it can be correlated to. And just being able to make that connection of a disease to a skin layer can help you understand the importance of something and know that that is the correct response for something like an exam. So how should I study? One of the things, my #1 recommendation is don't burn yourself out. I've seen so many of my friends throughout nursing and even my friends at other colleges with different majors. That burnout, that sitting around and just frying yourself with information to the point where you almost don't want to study, you don't want to look at your textbook, and you know, you're so overwhelmed with the upcoming exams. Don't do it to yourself. Understand that you might not know everything at the moment, and that is perfectly okay, but being able to study and test yourself to know, to have more confidence in what you're going to do, that is what the goal is. To be able to have that confidence going into an exam, to a practicum, to your first patient at clinical, and the first time you have an actual patient when you're a registered nurse. That is the goal. Being able to practice that application, being able to see that how one thing relates to another, and making those connections. And one of the things that is also important is using different resources. You can only stare at a textbook for so long. And I know that you guys do have a textbook, but you also have online resources. As far as I know, you guys have to do modules and homework via lab, specifically with that. There's so many different resources that come with your textbook. Use the games. One of the things that I used to do, for instance, was they have little chapter summaries that can be spoken to you for each chapter. And I would get tired of reading, so I would just sit there and I'd press play on the little chapter review, and she spoke for like 5 minutes of just an overview of the chapter. And sometimes I'd pick up on something of like, oh, I didn't pay attention to that, or I didn't realize that part of the chapter was stressed so much. And just being able to use those different resources that are given to you, going to tutoring services, going to groups, getting a group of friends together and quizzing yourselves or writing things up on the board, just trying out so many different things that here at a college you have available to you, that either come with your textbook, come with your tuition, or just come simply by having friends in your class. Use each other, use your teachers, use the school. And as I said before, getting a new perspective. Understanding that this isn't just something that you are learning to take a test. This is learning something for the rest of your clinical practice, hopefully for the rest of your life. And I hope that maybe that gave you a little bit of different perspective, and I'll open the floor up to you guys real quick to ask me any questions from the student's perspective before I invite Dr. Delaney down to talk from the teacher's perspective.
Don't be shy.
Yes?
Do you have anything that really helps you with lab practical practicing?
Yeah, so one of the things that I did a lot when it came to the practicals was they have the open lab periods in which you can go before the practicals. I recommend 100% going to that and practicing what you're going to be doing for your practicals. I know, as I said before, I'm very much a visual learner, so one of the things that I would do is I would find blank sheet fill-ins of whatever I was going to be doing for that section, such as if we were working on the skull, for instance. And there's so many different things that come with the brain in the skull for a practicum that you have to identify. One of the things that I would do is I would print out blank sheets of the skull, and I would strictly just draw everything identifying what I needed to know. And just that repetition of saying, okay, you know, I might not know everything immediately, but trying to fill in as much as you can, and then opening your textbook to see, you know, what did I miss, trying to fill that in. Using those resources. The textbook online for lab specifically, they have all the different modules. Do the extra modules, not just the ones that you have to do for class. play the games that they have. You can look up so many different anatomy and physiology games. I even have an, I don't have my phone with me, so I can't tell you specifically what the app is, but there's an NCLEX practice app strictly for anatomy and physiology. It allows you to have 3D models of all different parts of every body system. Use that. Be able to just see everything visually, and it'll help you when it comes to walking into that lab that day and being able to say, I know what this is, I know what this is, and I know what it is. Don't be shy. You can't be shy as a nurse. Yes?
I personally struggle with lab quizzes, so what do you recommend to help you study and be successful with the lab quizzes?
So specifically for the lab quizzes, you guys are obviously given the specific information. You have Boyer, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so with Boyer, yeah, it's more specifically to that information. A lot of times he will pull information that he says out loud as opposed to what is given to you. So recording the lectures and being able to write down things that you think you already don't have in front of you. You don't need to write down everything that's in front of you. You have that text already, you have those PowerPoints. One of the things that I did specifically for that was I tried to pay more attention to the things that I already didn't have in front of me with my PowerPoint and my textbook, and paying attention to the little things that I know he's going to talk about later or test me about later.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.